I'm Kevin Logghe. I live in Durham, North Carolina, and I'm a writer, I'm a curator, I'm a photographer. Everything I do revolves around photography. My interest is really centered in handcrafted photography, which a lot of people refer to as alternative photography, historical processes, other things. Handcrafted, emphasis on hand, talks about the process of creating a photograph that involves handwork. Many times it's unrepeatable, and that brings a unique quality to the process for the artist and for some collectors. It doesn't in and of itself make art valuable or more valuable or better, if you even want to use that phrase in referring to artwork, but it does make it different, and it makes the process of creating it different. I personally practice platinum palladium, cyanotype, gum printing, chrome oil, and as of this week, litho printing. In our recent competition, Hand-Eye, we had over 17 different processes represented in the photos that were submitted, and also in the final selections of our jurors, Christina Anderson and Sam Wang. Hand-Eye was the title we gave to our competition to really emphasize the coordination of the hand on the paper and the eye. It's really astonishing how many people, such as curators, art critics, gallerists, don't consider handcrafted processes to be part of the contemporary photography scene. How this all started for me was when I took my platinum palladium portfolio to PhotoFest in Houston a couple of years ago, and had an interesting experience with one reviewer in particular who looked at my portfolio and commented on the subject matter and the grace and the beauty that was contained in the images, and how much he loved the images, but how he was very sorry that he could never present them because they only represent contemporary photography. And that was a real alarm bell to me, and taking that story back to other photographers at PhotoFest, as one does, I found that the story wasn't at all unique, that other photographers who were doing other forms of handcrafted photography, some of which were very cutting edge and colorful and surreal, all of the genres of visual representation, were getting the same responses, that we only do contemporary photography, and that didn't include us, and I didn't understand it then, and now I just know it's flat out incorrect, and so we're trying to educate more people. People were thinking in terms of process and associating it not entirely incorrectly, because artists have certainly contributed to this to a certain extent, that handcrafted photographs were inherently nostalgic, unoriginal, that they were simply trying to recreate work that we've all seen before, mind your white Ansel Adams, the list goes on and on. And that's simply not true. There's as much original thought, creativity going into handcrafted photography as there is into digital or any other form of art that we're appreciating today. I use a variety of subject matter in my photography, and it's as eclectic and far-ranging as my personality as it is for any other artist. In my photographs, personally, about my work, what's very different from much of the tide of current photography is that I usually am trying to turn the mind of the viewer inward. I'm providing a question, not an answer. I'm not providing a narrative, which is one of those buzzwords which we hear so often right now. I'm not trying to tell a story. I'm not a photojournalist, so I'm not trying to tell someone else's story. I think there's other things which are just as important, and not to delve too much into things like spirituality and such, but that's part of it. I'm trying to get people to look inside themselves about issues, possibilities, answers, at least consider things that they might not normally consider, and how that relates to their own lives. I do it through a lot of memory triggers, what I think will trigger people's memories or responses, and that can come from popular culture. Most of us at least, will remember amazing amounts of things from things as mundane as commercials, what we've seen in the newspaper, the news, the history of our times, the apron our mother used to wear that had that little rooster on it. Things as personal and mundane as that can trigger very powerful memories and connect things that they might not otherwise connect. I'm an avid collector. I love flea markets, I love rummage sales, I love all of that, and I shop way more than I probably should. One of the things that I bought one time was something called a Michi-Manitou board, which isn't even manufactured anymore. It's a hand-painted wooden Ouija board. And it has the years are apparent on it. You can see the grain of the wood, and that, of course, a Ouija board and a Michi-Manitou board are ways of supposedly contacting another world and forecasting the future. And it's made up of a series of numbers, yes, no, and your hand will drift to the correct thing if you concentrate hard enough. And I just thought it was a fascinating visual object, and I did what I often do. I bought it because it didn't cost very much money, and I put it away and I said, someday I'm going to use this. A few years later, I was at a different flea market, and someone had mannequin heads for sale. Very badly beaten up, just the heads. Well, actually, she did have a few arms and torsos and things, but she had a bag of heads that she was willing to sell as a lot. And I bought the lot of heads, so I have between 10 and 12 mannequin heads sitting in a bag. And I had been wanting to work on a new series, portfolio, if you will, of photographs that were a little more surreal, that investigated the border between uncomfortable but attracted. So I situated one of the heads in particular in front of the Michi-Manitou board and did the right lighting and shot. And it originally was meant to be a single photograph, but the way I did the lighting, it almost naturally split into two halves. And of course, one half of the board is yes, and the other half is no. And to me, it just said, this is two pieces of art. It's not a single one. And so I split them apart to create the diptych. That head is not printed on the board. It's an object sitting in front, and the shadow it casts is an integral part of the composition of the photographs. And it shows the wear, and frequently, people who've seen it so far, initially, when they do their first glance, they think that it's a person who's posed in front of the board. And then they look more closely at it, and it shows much more wear and tear than most people would probably be showing. It's a combination of the lighting and an editorial choice made after the fact. The shadow is slightly unequally distributed, and it just so happened that on the no side of the board, there's more shadow, and on the yes side of the board, there's more light. I would love to say, well, of course, that was carefully thought through, and the placement was intentional and symbolic and meaningful, and it is symbolic and meaningful. It wasn't intentional. However, splitting a single image into two images, because if you look carefully at the two images in the diptych, there is a slight area of overlap, and so it's sort of the effect you got from old stereopticon cards. They merge into a single image, and it's another thing that sets you off and says, this isn't real. I'm entering into a world where the normal rules of physics don't apply. One of the very popular customs that's developed in art criticism and art writing today is to talk about the image as being separate from the object. And some people are even suggesting that a photograph never needs to be printed. And to that we respond that a photograph that's never printed is simply an image. A photograph is an image that becomes an object that you can hold, that you can put on your wall, that you can admire in a book. And the process of doing that is very personal in handcrafted photography. Not to take anything away from any other form of photography, but it's physical involvement, and it affects the processes mentally and creatively, and that affects the work. And people choose to be creating handcrafted photography for that very experience, because they don't want to be detached from their work. They don't want a computer and a printer between them and their work. They want to touch it, and they want to create an object that will subsequently be touched, become part of someone's home, hang in a museum where other people can wonder about it and how it came to be and why does it look that way.